I never thought I'd be a single mother at 35, but life has its own plans. When my husband, Michael, died in a workplace accident 4 years ago, I was left alone to raise our son, Oliver. While not completely alone, I had my mother-in-law, Barbara, breathing down my neck at every turn, scrutinizing my every decision as if she were waiting for me to fail. "He needs structure, Sophia," she'd say, showing up unannounced at our house. Michael always had structure growing up. Or, "Are you sure those after-school activities are challenging enough?" Michael was already in advanced programs at his age. Michael this, Michael that. Sometimes I wondered if Barbara saw Oliver as a person in his own right or just a vessel to recreate her perfect son. Don't get me wrong, Michael was wonderful, but he wasn't perfect. Nobody is, except in Barbara's carefully curated memories. I focused on giving Oliver what he needed: love, support, and the freedom to be himself. While Barbara pushed for prestigious private schools, I kept him in public school, where his friends were. When she insisted on competitive sports, I let Oliver choose art club instead. Each decision earned me another disapproving look, another subtle dig about my parenting. "I just worry about his future," Barbara would say, lips pursed into that familiar frown. "You're too soft on him, Sophia. Boys need a firm hand." The morning of Oliver's high school graduation dawned bright and clear. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing down my navy dress and fighting back tears. Michael should have been here for this. He should have been helping Oliver with his tie, making bad dad jokes to lighten the mood, beaming with pride as our son received his diploma. "Mom?" Oliver's voice pulled me from my thoughts. He stood in the doorway, struggling with his graduation tie. "Help." My heart swelled as I turned to face him. At 17, he was already taller than me, with his father's strong jaw and my dark curls. But his gentle spirit was all his own. "Come here," I said, reaching for the tie. As I adjusted it, I caught his reflection in the mirror. "Your dad would be so proud of you today, Ollie." "You think so?" Something in his voice made me look up. Uncertainty clouded his features, a reminder that beneath his growing confidence, he was still a boy who missed his father. "I know so," I assured him, smoothing his collar. "And I'm proud of you too, so proud." The ceremony was being held in the school's auditorium, and Barbara was already waiting when we arrived. She wore an expensive-looking gray suit and pearls, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. The second she spotted us, her eyes narrowed. "Oliver, darling," she called out, ignoring me completely. "That tie is crooked. Here, let Grandma fix it." She shot me a pointed look. Some things require a proper touch. I bit back a retort, reminding myself this was Oliver's day. He didn't need family drama during his graduation. But Barbara wasn't done. "I still think you should have applied to Princeton," she said as she fussed with his tie. "Your father was accepted there, you know, full scholarship." Another pointed look in my direction. "But I suppose community college is an option." Oliver stiffened. "Grandma, places everyone." The coordinator's voice cut through the growing tension. "Graduates, please line up alphabetically." I hugged Oliver quickly. "Go shine, sweetheart." As we took our seats, Barbara's voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. "You've coddled him, Sophia, made him soft, just like you made Michael soft in the end." The words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Today is about Oliver, Barbara. Let's focus on celebrating his achievement." She sniffed dismissively. "What achievement? Barely graduating from a mediocre public school." Michael was valedictorian. He had a real future ahead of him before. Before what? I turned to face her fully. Before he met me. Well, if the shoe fits. Her voice was ice. He could have been running the company by now. Instead, he was working that dangerous construction job because you convinced him to follow his passion. She spat the last word like it was dirty. The lights dimmed before I could respond, and the ceremony began. I tried to focus on the principal's welcome speech, but Barbara's words echoed in my head. She'd never forgiven me for supporting Michael when he left his father's company to start his own construction business. In her mind, if he'd stayed in his safe office job, he'd still be alive. Maybe she was right. The thought crept in despite my best efforts to banish it. If I hadn't encouraged Michael to follow his dreams, would he still be here? Would Oliver have grown up with a father? And now the principal's voice cut through my spiral of guilt. "We'll begin presenting the diplomas." I washed through tears as student after student crossed the stage. When they called Oliver Harrison, I held my breath. My beautiful boy walked across that stage with his head held high, and I could have sworn I saw Michael's smile in his face. Then Barbara stood up. "Is this what you wanted, Sophia?" Her voice carried through the suddenly silent auditorium. "My grandson, settling for mediocrity? First you ruined my son's life, and now you've ruined Oliver's future too." I sat frozen in my seat, mortified, as hundreds of eyes turned in our direction. Oliver stood on stage, diploma in hand, looking like he wanted to disappear. This was supposed to be his moment, and Barbara was turning it into a spectacle. "Mrs. Harrison," Principal Roberts' stern voice cut through the whispers, "please take your seat." But Barbara was on a roll now, years of resentment pouring out. "You failed him as a mother, just like you failed as a wife. My son would be ashamed if he could see." Actually, Principal Roberts interrupted, holding up a thick manila folder. "I think there's something you need to see, Mrs. Harrison." His eyes met mine across the auditorium, and he smiled. "Something that might change your mind about who's failed whom." Principal Roberts descended from the stage, manila folder in hand, his footsteps echoing through the silent auditorium. The whispers had faded into a heavy stillness as he approached our row. Barbara remained standing, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her rigid posture. "Mrs. Harrison, the elder," he clarified with a gentle smile in my direction. "I've been meaning to share this with you. I was saving it for after the ceremony, but given your concerns about Oliver's achievements, perhaps now is the perfect time." He opened the folder, and I caught glimpses of official letterheads, certificates, and what looked like newspaper clippings. Barbara's eyes narrowed as she peered at the documents. "What is this?" she demanded, though her voice had lost some of its earlier venom. "This," Principal Roberts said, pulling out the first document, "is a letter from MIT. Oliver has been accepted with a full scholarship to their engineering program." The gasp that rippled through the audience was audible. Barbara's face went pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He said he was going to community college." Because I asked him not to tell anyone yet, I found myself saying, my voice stronger than I expected. "He wanted to spare your feelings, knowing how set you were on Princeton." Principal Roberts nodded, pulling out more papers. Oliver's SAT scores placed him in the top 1% nationally, but more importantly, his independent research project on sustainable building materials caught MIT's attention. They were particularly impressed by how he combined engineering principles with his father's construction background. I watched as tears began to form in Barbara's eyes. Principal Roberts wasn't finished. "This," he continued, showing another document, "is a patent application. Oliver developed a new type of reinforced concrete that's both more environmentally friendly and potentially safer for construction workers." He dedicated it to his father's memory. The sound that escaped Barbara's throat was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. I remembered the long hours Oliver had spent in his room working on that project. How he'd refused to tell me all the details because he wanted it to be a surprise. "But," Barbara's voice trembled, "he never said anything. He's in art club, for heaven's sake. He doesn't even play sports." Actually, Principal Roberts smiled. Oliver used the art club's 3D printer to create his project prototypes. He taught himself computer-aided design to model his ideas. As for sports, he pulled out a newspaper clipping. He's been volunteering at the Children's Hospital, teaching art therapy to kids in the cancer ward. The hospital's director wrote one of his recommendation letters. I watched as Barbara sank slowly into her seat, the fight draining out of her. On stage, Oliver stood watching us, and I could see both worry and relief warring on his face. "There's more," Principal Roberts continued softly. "Oliver established a peer tutoring program for struggling students. He's helped raise their average grades by 2 letter grades. He also organized a memorial fundraiser in his father's name that raised enough money to provide safety equipment for 3 small construction companies." Tears were flowing freely down Barbara's cheeks now. I reached over and took her hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. "He did all this," she whispered, "and we never knew. He didn't do it for recognition," I said gently. "He did it because it mattered to him, because it was the right thing to do." Principal Roberts nodded. "Oliver has shown exceptional leadership, creativity, and compassion. He's exactly the kind of student MIT is looking for. Someone who can think outside the box and use their talents to help others." The audience burst into spontaneous applause. Oliver blushed, ducking his head in that way that always reminded me of his father. But why didn't he tell me? Barbara's voice was small, almost childlike in its confusion. I squeezed her hand. Because you were so focused on him being exactly like Michael. You couldn't see who he really is. He's not just Michael's son, Barbara. He's his own person. Mrs. Harrison, Principal Roberts added kindly, your grandson hasn't failed. Far from it. He's blazed his own trail, combining his father's practical knowledge with his own innovative thinking. And if I may say so, he glanced at me. He's had excellent guidance. Sometimes the best parenting isn't about pushing children into a predetermined mold, but about giving them the freedom to become who they're meant to be. Barbara's grip on my hand tightened. The auditorium had gone quiet again, everyone watching our family drama unfold. I could feel hundreds of eyes on us, but for once I didn't mind. Let them see. Let them see how love and understanding can bridge even the deepest divides. Barbara's voice cracked. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking. I need to speak to my grandson. Principal Roberts gestured to Oliver, who walked down from the stage, his steps hesitant. As he approached, Barbara opened her arms. Oliver, she sobbed, pulling him into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Over her shoulder, Oliver's eyes met mine. In them, I saw relief, love, and something else. Pride. Not just in his achievements, but in who he was, who we'd helped him become. The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it was accompanied by cheers and a few tears. Principal Roberts discreetly wiped his eyes before returning to the stage to continue the ceremony. As we sat back down, Barbara still clutching Oliver's hand, she leaned over to me. Sophia, she whispered, I owe you an apology too, many apologies. I smiled through my own tears. We have time, I said softly. We have all the time in the world. After the ceremony, we gathered in the school garden where families were taking photos and sharing congratulations. The tension from earlier had dissolved into something new and fragile, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. Barbara stood awkwardly, holding her designer purse, looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. The carefully maintained facade of the proper society widow had cracked, revealing the vulnerable woman beneath. Oliver, she said softly, would you show me your project? The one about the building materials. His face lit up. Reaching into his graduation gown, he pulled out his phone and quickly brought up a series of detailed drawings and 3D models. As he explained the technical aspects, his hands moved animatedly, just like Michael's used to when he was excited about something. See, the reinforced polymer matrix distributes force more evenly, he explained, showing a simulation. If Dad had been working with something like this, he trailed off, swallowing hard. Barbara's hand trembled as she touched the screen. He would have been so proud, she whispered, not just of the project, but of how you're trying to protect other families from what happened to ours. I watched them together, remembering all the times Barbara had criticized Oliver's obsession with art and computers, never realizing he was combining these interests with Michael's legacy in his own unique way. I have something to show you both, I said, pulling out an envelope I'd been saving for after the ceremony. Oliver doesn't know about this yet. They looked at me curiously as I handed Barbara a letter. Her eyes widened as she read. This is from Michael's old company, she breathed. I nodded. They want to fund Oliver's research. They're offering to sponsor his MIT program and provide resources for further development of his safety materials. I turned to Oliver, whose mouth had dropped open. Your father's former colleagues saw your patent application. They say it's exactly the kind of innovation the industry needs. Mom. Oliver's voice cracked with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted it to be a surprise, I smiled. Just like you surprised us with everything you've accomplished. Barbara handed the letter back with shaking hands. All this time, she said, I thought you were holding him back, but you were letting him fly. She turned to Oliver. And you, my brilliant boy, you've soared higher than any of us imagined. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pulled us both into a hug. Michael would be so proud of both of you, she whispered. And I was so wrong. Can you forgive a foolish old woman who was too caught up in her grief to see what was right in front of her? I forgive you, Grandma, Oliver said softly. I know you missed Dad. We all did. We still do. I found myself nodding. We each dealt with our grief differently. Barbara, You tried to preserve Michael's memory by recreating his path. I tried to honor it by letting Oliver find his own way. And I found a way to combine both," Oliver added, his voice strong and clear. "I'm not just Dad's son or Mom's son. I'm me. But everything I am includes pieces of both of you and him." As we stood there in the warm afternoon sun, I felt something shift and settle into place. The weight of Barbara's disapproval, which had hung over us for 4 years, finally lifted. In its place, I felt the beginning of something new: understanding, acceptance, maybe even friendship. Later that evening, as we sat in our backyard sharing a celebratory dinner, Barbara reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo album. "Oliver," she said, "I'd like to tell you some stories about your father. Not about his achievements or his grades, but about who he really was. Like the time he tried to build a treehouse and ended up calling the fire department to get him down." As she spoke, sharing memories of Michael's mishaps and triumphs, his human moments rather than his idealized ones, I watched Oliver lean in, soaking up these new dimensions of his father. And I saw Barbara finally letting go of the perfect son she constructed in her grief, embracing instead the beautifully imperfect reality of who he had been. In that moment, I felt Michael's presence so strongly it took my breath away. He was there in Oliver's laugh, in Barbara's softening eyes, in the way the three of us were finally becoming what we should have been all along: a family. Sometimes it takes a dramatic moment to break down the walls we build around our hearts. Sometimes it takes a principal with a folder full of achievements to show us what we've been too blind to see. But mostly, it takes love. Love strong enough to survive grief, to forgive mistakes, and to accept each other for who we really are. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I raised my glass. "To Oliver," I said, "and to new beginnings." "To family," Barbara added softly, her eyes shining with tears and hope. "To all of us," Oliver finished, "past, present, and future." Our glasses clinked together, the sound ringing clear and true in the peaceful evening air.